The twilight of the Republic was a time of profound uncertainty and strife. The once mighty galactic government, seated in the grand spires of Coruscant, had long been hailed as the beacon of order and democracy in a vast and turbulent galaxy. Yet by the time the Clone Wars erupted, the Republic was no longer the unified force of justice it once prided itself on being. Corruption festered in its institutions, special interests dictated its policies, and the needs of the common citizen were often eclipsed by the ambitions of the elite. It was in this fractured political landscape that the Jedi Order, guardians of peace for millennia, found themselves at odds with their own purpose. Tasked with saving a republic that seemed increasingly resistant to their aid, they embarked on a journey that would test their very identity. The Jedi Order had always existed in a delicate balance with the Republic. They were not rulers but servants, defenders of peace who wielded the Force as a tool for justice. However, as the Republic expanded, so too did the demands placed upon the Jedi. They were called upon to mediate disputes, protect trade routes, and quell uprisings in the far reaches of the Outer Rim. While the Jedi took these responsibilities seriously, the strain of serving a sprawling galactic government began to erode their focus. Instead of contemplative guardianship, they became enmeshed in the Republic's bureaucracy, tethered to its Senate, and increasingly entangled in political maneuvering. This symbiosis came to a head during the Clone Wars. The conflict was sparked by the secession of countless star systems under the banner of the Confederacy of Independent Systems. The Separatists, led by Count Dooku, a former Jedi Master turned Sith, exploited the disillusionment of countless worlds who felt abandoned by the Republic. These grievances were not without merit. Coruscant's central government had long neglected the Outer Rim, favoring core worlds that contributed heavily to the galactic economy. The Separatists promised freedom from this neglect, a chance to build new futures unburdened by the Republic's inefficiencies and corruption. Faced with the threat of galactic division, the Jedi found themselves thrust into a war they were ill-prepared to fight. The Republic's reliance on the newly formed clone army placed the Jedi in an unprecedented position. They became generals, leading legions of soldiers into battle against an enemy that, at its core, represented legitimate grievances. Despite their initial reluctance, the Jedi committed fully to the war effort, believing that victory would restore stability and allow them to address the underlying issues that had led to the conflict. Yet, the very act of participating in the war further alienated the Jedi from their purpose. By assuming military roles, they compromised their identity as peacekeepers. The galaxy saw them not as impartial guardians of justice, but as instruments of the Republic's military-industrial complex. For many within the Republic, especially in the Senate, the Jedi's willingness to fight was both a boon and a liability. Senators who had grown rich off war profiteering saw the Jedi as useful tools, while others viewed their increasing power with suspicion. Meanwhile, on the battlefields, countless civilians and soldiers alike questioned why the Jedi, who preached peace, perpetuated violence. The Jedi, too, grappled with this contradiction. Masters like Yoda and Mace Windu spent long hours in meditation, seeking the will of the Force. However, the clarity they sought was elusive. The dark side clouded everything, masking the true nature of the conflict and the motives behind it. Unbeknownst to them, Darth Sidious, the Sith Lord who had orchestrated the war, sat at the heart of the Republic itself. As Chancellor Palpatine, he deftly manipulated both the Senate and the Jedi, ensuring that their every move played into his grand design. As the war dragged on, the Republic's trust in the Jedi continued to wane. Palpatine, with his seemingly endless charisma and promises of security, cultivated a following that saw him as the Republic's savior. His emergency powers, granted under the pretense of wartime necessity, allowed him to circumvent the Senate and consolidate control. The Jedi, wary of his growing influence, attempted to counsel the Senate against further empowering him. Yet their warnings often fell on deaf ears. Many senators viewed the Jedi's caution as a veiled attempt to seize control for themselves. The seeds of distrust, sown by Palpatine, took root. Within the Order, dissent began to grow. Younger Jedi, like Anakin Skywalker, struggled with the constraints of the Jedi Code. Anakin, hailed as the Chosen One, bore the weight of prophecy and expectation. Yet his personal struggles, particularly his secret love for Padme Amidala, placed him at odds with the Order's teachings. He grew increasingly disillusioned with the Jedi's leadership, seeing their adherence to tradition as a barrier to effective action. Palpatine, ever the opportunist, exploited Anakin's doubts, positioning himself as a mentor and confidant. Through whispers of power and promises of saving those he loved, Palpatine ensnared Anakin in his web, leading him down a dark path. As the war reached its climax, the Jedi faced their most difficult decision. Evidence mounted that Palpatine was more than he appeared, a Sith Lord in the highest seat of power. Yet to confront him directly risked confirming the Senate's worst fears, that the Jedi sought to overthrow the Republic. When Mace Windu and a cadre of Jedi Masters attempted to arrest Palpatine, they were met with violence. Anakin, manipulated to believe the Jedi were traitors, intervened, sealing the Order's fate. Palpatine declared the Jedi traitors and initiated Order 66, a contingency plan that turned the clone army against their Jedi commanders. Across the galaxy, Jedi fell to the very soldiers they had led, their bonds of trust shattered in an instant. The Republic, now rebranded as the Galactic Empire, cheered the purging of the Jedi. They were painted as conspirators who had nearly destroyed the Republic from within. The galaxy, weary from war and seduced by promises of peace, willingly embraced the Empire, blind to the tyranny that would follow. For the surviving Jedi, the fall of the Republic was not merely a political failure, but a spiritual one. They had fought to save a system that had, in its final moments, rejected them entirely. Their warnings had been ignored, their efforts misconstrued, and their sacrifices rendered meaningless in the eyes of the public. The Jedi Order, once revered, became a ghost of its former self, hunted, vilified, and broken. Yet, in their failure, the Jedi found the seeds of renewal. Those who survived, like Yoda and Obi-Wan Kenobi, retreated into exile, reflecting on the mistakes that had led to their downfall. They recognized that their attachment to the Republic had blinded them to the greater truths of the Force. In their isolation, they began to see the path forward not through political entanglements, but through a return to their spiritual roots. The Jedi's true mission, they realized, was not to serve a flawed government, but to serve the will of the Force itself. The story of the Jedi and the Republic is one of tragic irony. They sought to save a government that no longer believed in them, only to be cast aside in its final moments. Yet, in their loss, the Jedi learned the harshest lesson of all, that true peace could not be imposed through war or preserved through politics. It could only be found in the balance of the Force, a balance they would strive to restore in the shadow of the Empire. The aftermath of Order 66 left the galaxy in a state of hushed disbelief. While the Republic had transformed into the Galactic Empire almost overnight, the rapidity of the change masked a deeper truth. The Republic had been dying long before Palpatine's rise to power. The populace, worn down by years of war, had grown indifferent to the ideals that once bound them together. They craved stability, even at the cost of freedom. This was the harsh reality the Jedi had failed to grasp in time. Their efforts to save the Republic were noble, but they overlooked a fundamental truth: a government cannot be saved if its people no longer believe in it. The Jedi Order, in its arrogance, had assumed the Republic's people would rally behind their warnings. But while the Jedi spoke of the dangers posed by the Sith, the citizens of Coruscant and countless other systems saw only a distant war, a conflict they were desperate to end. For many, the Jedi's interventions seemed abstract, their philosophies detached from the struggles of everyday life. This disconnect was not new, it had been growing for decades. The Jedi's role as mediators and warriors had taken them farther from the common people, whose lives were shaped not by grand battles but by the slow grind of poverty, oppression, and neglect. Palpatine understood this disconnect better than anyone. He played on the fears and frustrations of the galaxy's citizens, presenting himself as a leader of action while painting the Jedi as relics of a bygone era. His rhetoric was simple yet effective. The Jedi were idealists who had failed to protect the galaxy from chaos. In contrast, he offered a vision of strength and unity, a future where order would reign. The people, desperate for an end to the Clone Wars, embraced this vision without question. For the Jedi, this rejection was a bitter pill to swallow. They had spent centuries cultivating a reputation as defenders of peace, yet in their greatest moment of need, they found themselves alone. The galaxy's disillusionment with the Jedi was not entirely unwarranted. Despite their best intentions, the Order had become insular, more focused on preserving their traditions than adapting to the changing galaxy. They had failed to see how the Republic's corruption and inefficiency had eroded public trust, and by the time they acted, it was too late. In the final days of the Republic, the Jedi Council struggled to reconcile their duty to the Senate with their growing mistrust of Palpatine. Every attempt to expose his true nature was met with resistance or outright hostility. The Senate, bloated with complacency and greed, saw the Jedi's warnings as an affront to their authority. Even senators like Bail Organa and Mon Mothma, who secretly sympathized with the Jedi, were powerless to sway the majority. The political machinery of the Republic was too deeply entrenched, its leaders too eager to cling to the illusion of control. The Jedi's downfall was not merely the result of external forces, it was also rooted in their internal failings. Their rigid adherence to the Jedi Code, while noble in its intent, left little room for flexibility or personal connection. Anakin Skywalker's fall to the dark side was emblematic of this flaw. His struggles with attachment and fear were met with lectures and discipline rather than compassion and understanding. The Council, blinded by their own dogma, failed to see the pain and conflict within their chosen one. In their attempt to mold him into the perfect Jedi, they inadvertently pushed him toward the very darkness they sought to prevent. Anakin's betrayal was both deeply personal and symbolically tragic. He was not just a Jedi, but a representation of the Order's hopes and failures. His descent into Darth Vader was a devastating blow, not only because it marked the loss of a powerful ally, but because it underscored the Jedi's inability to adapt. They had placed their faith in prophecy, believing Anakin would bring balance to the Force, yet they failed to guide him through the turbulent path such a destiny required. In the aftermath of their near-total annihilation, the surviving Jedi faced an existential crisis. Everything they had built, everything they had believed in, lay in ruins. For Yoda and Obi-Wan, the weight of their failure was immense. They had fought valiantly to save the Republic, but their efforts had only hastened its transformation into an empire. In their solitude, they were forced to confront the painful truth the Jedi had been fighting the wrong battle. Their mission had become too entangled with the politics of the Republic, blinding them to the deeper currents of the Force. In his exile on Dagobah, Yoda reflected on centuries of Jedi tradition. He came to understand that the Order's downfall was not merely the result of external manipulation, but a consequence of their own hubris. The Jedi had placed themselves above the people they served, believing their wisdom and connection to the Force made them infallible. This arrogance had left them vulnerable to the Sith's machinations, and in the end, it was the people those they had sworn to protect who turned against them. Obi-Wan, meanwhile, carried the burden of his personal failure. He had trained Anakin, watched him grow from a gifted boy into a powerful Jedi, only to see him fall into darkness. On Tatooine, he kept a silent vigil over Anakin's son, Luke, hoping that the boy might one day redeem the mistakes of the past. For Obi-Wan, the path forward was one of patience and quiet resolve. He knew the Jedi could not rebuild their order as it once was. They would need to learn from their failures and forge a new way. The irony of the Jedi's quest to save the Republic was that their greatest success lay not in their actions during the Clone Wars, but in the hope they left behind. Luke Skywalker, raised far from the political machinations of Coruscant, grew up with a simple understanding of right and wrong. When the time came, he embraced the teachings of the Force not as a soldier or politician, but as a seeker of truth and balance. In Luke, the Jedi found their redemption not through the preservation of the Republic, but through the renewal of their core purpose. The fall of the Republic and the Jedi's role in its demise serve as a poignant reminder of the dangers of stagnation and complacency. The galaxy, for all its complexity, is a living, evolving entity. The Jedi, in their pursuit of stability, had forgotten that true peace requires constant vigilance and adaptation. They had sought to save a republic that had already lost its way, blind to the fact that their mission was not to uphold a flawed system, but to guide the galaxy toward harmony. In the end, the Jedi's failure was not the end of their story, but a painful chapter in their journey. From the ashes of the Republic and the shadow of the Empire, they found the strength to rise again, wiser and more attuned to the will of the Force. It was through this renewal that they finally began to understand the true nature of their calling, not as servants of a government, but as guardians of balance in an ever-changing galaxy. The legacy of the Jedi and the Republic is a testament to the resilience of hope and the enduring power of belief. Though the Republic fell and the Jedi were nearly extinguished, their ideals endured, carried forward by those who refused to let the darkness prevail. In the end, the Jedi's greatest triumph was not in saving the Republic, but in rediscovering their purpose and rekindling the light that had always been their guide.